All right. So welcome to the IELT webinar for May. And this, I want to thank our host, our sponsor, SPA, Speaking Proficiency Assessment. And this month, we want to talk about assessing writing. And we want to look especially at content, organization, grammar, and vocabulary. And I've sent everyone some sample essays that we're going to be looking at in a few minutes. So I hope you can all access those. Is this working? Ah, here we go. So I'd like to start out with some warm-up questions, and I'd like everyone to just sort of chime in about these. So first is a very general question. What do we mean when we say assessing writing? So I'll open that up to anyone who'd like to answer. What do we mean when we say assessing writing? Christine, we'll begin with you.
Well, I think part of it is that we need to, for us and our program, we need to look at the writing and determine whether it meets certain learning outcomes. Mm-hmm. So we need to assess it along those outcomes, whether that's content or grammar or vocabulary or organization and flow.
Okay.
So that's part of our assessing writing.
Great. Anyone want to add anything to that? Anyone else have another idea, or you want to add anything?
Well, I would add something which might sound a generalization, because assessing writing would be assessing the degree to which we manage it to help the student learn certain skills and get some knowledge in vocabulary, grammar. We're actually assessing the sigma of many competencies and sub-competencies. And it's always according to a benchmark or a rubric, because we don't assess in a vacuum, but we assess according to certain levels. That's a general idea of one of mine that I'm working on my PhD. In assessment of speaking, but I'm also interested in writing, and I think that I will learn more than what I was expecting.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Let's go ahead. My PowerPoint's not cooperating today. How do you generally assess writing? Abdul Samad, would you like to sort of chime in on this one?
Oh yeah, sure. How I generally assess writing, that's a good question. Usually by having a kind of a rubric, a standard, a way of general idea that the students need to know by the goals, the objective of the class or the writing or the piece, and what they need to reach, what is the bar or the level to reach. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else want to add anything to that? Eric, I'll give this one to you to start off. And really, I mean, the more people who want to comment, the better. How important is the role of teacher feedback in assessing writing?
I think it's crucial. Because, you know, if students could pick up writing, and that goes for any of us, on our own and see what we're not doing as well as we could, you know, it would take a million years, right? So we're there to guide them, to focus them, and, you know, maybe help them see what they're not doing quite as either well, if you want to put it in a you know, positive negative spin, or how they're not according to the norms that they need to, and what they're, you know, where, and also where they're making progress, and where they should focus their future efforts. So without, you know, good feedback, they're just going to continue to probably make the same errors that they did before.
Okay, so you think that the feedback is really crucial in overcoming errors?
Overcoming errors, and according to keeping in, and also showing, discussing where they are doing well, where their writing was very clear and interesting, and so forth.
All right. Anyone else want to add to that?
I would like to add something to
Please.
point. The question was about how important is the role of the teacher feedback, and mine is how important is the feedback to the teacher, because we are always thinking that by assessing the students' writing, we are trying to know to which point have they reached the goals of the program, of the curriculum. But we have also to use that feedback to reflect about our own teaching. Why did they make this kind of mistake? What did they do wrong? And I could maybe next time improve in order to help them avoid making the same mistakes. So the feedback would be double. We are assessing, giving marks to the students and letting them know where are their weaknesses and the strengths. At the same time, we take advantage of that information to readapt our teaching. That's my point of view.
Okay, great. And welcome to Jim Valentine, who's just joined us.
Hi.
Hi. Elena, if you can respond, we were having some trouble hearing you before. If you can respond, how many drafts of an essay or piece of writing do you allow students? Elena, if you're using the chat, I'm going to have trouble seeing that because I'm sharing. Jim, we'll let you answer that one. Elena, if you
okay, I'm not a writing teacher. I'm actually administrative over the
Sure.
American Language Institute. But what I know, there's a variety. I mean, depending on which faculty teacher is doing the course, and but we definitely have certainly multiple draft essays in the class. Back to the other question too, just to, number 3. I mean, I was just going to say something quite obvious, which is that the role of teacher feedback depends on what kind of assessing you're doing, right? So if you're doing, like someone mentioned, a test with a rubric for placement, etc., there is no feedback. Whereas in classroom, obviously there's a great deal more. And it made me reflect. We had a teacher, a faculty member here way back, who was quite rebellious in her way of thinking about everything. So I'm not saying I agree with her, but she argued with the idea that you use symbols or get students to figure out this is a label an error. She would actually give at the high level of academics. She would give the language. She felt you could give the language, and students through practice and reiteration would get the language that way. But it was just not really very common, I don't think. She has some articles I could share the references at some point. But very interesting. She was highly successful.
Okay.
What do you mean by give the language?
Well, I mean, she would they would be writing, lots of times dissertation writers, they would make a mistake and she'd write it correctly. Like actually write the language for what they were trying to say.
I do
in
that.
a more academic way. So, which is not generally a way I think most people, again, I'm not a writing teacher, but that's not generally the approach people take.
So this is more of an this is more like editing rather than developing writing skills.
Although she would argue no, because I know she has a whole, in one of the articles, a response of this is not just editing. People will tell me it's editing, and then she has a reason why she's saying it's not. Again, this is her opinion, not mine.
I would agree with her opinion.
Yeah, and she's passed away, so we can't talk to her directly, but she has an article. Yeah.
What's her name?
Sharon Myers. She was at Texas Tech at the time. She came to USC in her early, almost retirement years.
And I just want to, these warm-up questions are really for you, but I just want to give a little of my own idea here. Because I've noticed three people talking about, when we talk about giving feedback or assessing writing, I keep hearing about finding errors and correcting errors. And I really think that we as teachers sometimes focus too much on error correction as a way of giving feedback on writing. And I think it's important to remember that writing actually means developing your voice as a writer. So it's not only about finding mistakes and correcting mistakes, but it's also about developing the writing skill. So I think certainly error correction is a part of learning the process of writing. But I think it's so much more than that, really. Anyway, that's my opinion. Let's go ahead to our next question. Abdul Samad, we'll go back to you. What are the most important things you look for when assessing student writing?
Is that a question for me or for everybody?
For everyone, but I'm just getting you started because people are hesitant to sort of take the initiative. So.
Okay, so then I think what are the most important things I see? I think the most important thing I see is the growth. Did the learner, did the writer make progress, growth in their writing skills, in the way they share their voice, in the way they share their ideas, and even like the language itself, the voice. So it's the growth as a concept, rather than, oh, you missed a comma here, or you didn't use he or she here, which are important, yes. But that's not like my biggest focus on that.
Okay. Anyone else want to answer this question? The most important things you're looking for when you assess student writing?
So for me, I think too, it would also depend on level. Are you working with beginners or are you working with dissertation students? Would change the things that you look for. I think it's important to, like in your rubrics, to have those things outlined that you are looking for, because you don't want to assess students in the same way if they're at different levels.
Okay. I think Eric raised his hand.
Yeah, I would agree with what Christine just said, and add that mostly what I'm looking for is their meaning clear? Are they conveying what, as far as I can tell, they've intended to convey? And, you know, grammar errors and vocabulary errors and all those things are only relevant insofar as you know, the meaning can be understood by, you know, what I know or assume to be you know, their peers or whoever will be reading their professional writing or academic writing outside of my class.
Okay. And, you know, I think that's a really interesting, that's a really important point. And I come back to that all the time, is that our profession is one of the few professions where what they do for us is completely unimportant, except to the degree that it reflects what they're going to do for non-specialists, right? Because we're language specialists, and we can often understand things that they intend when, you know, maybe no one else will, or vice versa. We may be very critical of a work, a student work, that would not be criticized very much at all outside this field, right? And we have to remember that we're always trying to help students so that they are proficient users of language outside of the ESL classroom. And that's really I think our ultimate goal. Let's go ahead. So several people mentioned rubrics, which is wonderful. I'm a big fan of rubrics, but I'm going to completely avoid that topic today. I want to look at writing in terms of evaluation of writing or assessing writing in terms of 4 categories: content, organization, grammar, and vocabulary. And these would fit into rubrics very well. But I want to, for today's purposes, avoid using rubrics or thinking in terms of rubrics themselves, and just look more at those concepts that might go into rubrics. So let's very quickly go over these, and then we're gonna practice a little bit with that. So when I talk about content, the first thing we might want to ask is the writing on task and also on topic, and what's the difference between task and topic? Let's look at an example prompt. Compare and contrast living in an apartment and living in a house, for example. If the writer is on topic, he would be discussing apartments and houses. Now, he may not be comparing and contrasting, but he would definitely be discussing apartments and houses. And in that case, he would be on topic, right? If he's writing about penguins, then he's off topic, obviously, right? Whereas if the writer is mainly comparing and contrasting, not describing, not evaluating, or some other task, then he's on task, right? So I think it's, in most cases, most writing we see is on topic. Sometimes it may not be, but I think it's almost always the writing that we see as teachers is on topic. But it may be off task if they're not completing the task that they're asked to do. So that's really, I think, one important point of content. Going ahead, we can ask if there's a logical flow to the writing that a reader can easily follow without rereading. So can you take their writing and pick it up as a, as a reader and read it without going back and sort of figuring out, well, what did they mean here? And I asked this question twice. And the second one is, can the writing generally be easily followed? So sometimes it's a problem of logic, and other times it's a problem of simply the ability to convey ideas. But both of those would fall under the category of content. Also, are all paragraphs adequately developed? And that includes not only the body paragraphs, but the introduction and conclusion. And I see a lot of essays where you've got this sort of very underdeveloped introduction and very underdeveloped conclusion, and then some well-developed body paragraphs. But we need to remember that introductions and conclusions are also real paragraphs that need to be adequately developed. And finally, is the writing in the correct style and genre? Are we looking at academic writing, or are we looking at email, or are we looking at a business letter? Whatever it is it written in the right format or the right style and genre? Okay, I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly to leave plenty of time for us to do our exercises. So if there's something that you're not clear on, or if I've gone too quickly, please just ask. So just shout out. Organization, let's talk about organization. Is there a thesis or a main idea statement? Now, of course, we know in English that would usually come somewhere in the introduction. In other styles of writing, we might see that come more in the conclusion. That may not be a good English style, but it may reflect the writer's style. And we have to always remember where, to what degree are writers expressing themselves in their own personal way. So, but certainly we should see some kind of thesis or main idea statement somewhere in the article. Are paragraphs unified around a clear central idea? So for each paragraph, is there a clear central idea? Does each paragraph have a clear topic sentence? Now, of course, we know that not every paragraph in the real world has a topic sentence. Sometimes we sort of infer the topic sentence from the supporting sentences that are there. But often there will be a clear topic sentence. And again, are there good supporting sentences? And are any of the supporting sentences irrelevant? And if they're irrelevant, does that mean they should really get moved to another paragraph where they might be more relevant? Or maybe should they just be removed entirely because they're entirely off topic? And then finally, about organization cohesion. Do we see the kinds of linking words and phrases that are connecting our sentences together well? Are the students able to, use in addition or however correctly, or are they sometimes confusing those ideas? Okay, for example, etc. Right? Are they able to use good pronoun reference? And do we see a good repetition and synonyms to indicate linking of main ideas across sentences in a paragraph and even between paragraphs? In terms of grammar, I think, again, it's that knee-jerk reaction to go back to always thinking about error correction. But I think the first thing we want to think of when we think about grammar is not only are they correct, but what are they attempting to do? So what is their range, their grammatical range, and what is their complexity? Are they always playing it safe? I mean, you can write, almost perfect, grammatically perfect essays if you stick to the simple present tense and never venture beyond simple sentences. But of course, that's not really good writing. So let's look at how much familiarity our students can demonstrate with a range of structures and a complexity of structures. So are they using simple, compound, and complex sentences? Are they able to use reduced clauses and adverb phrases? Are they able to use the passive voice? Are they able to use complex verb structure? All of these would be examples of range and complexity in grammar. And then, of course, we also want to think, on the other hand, we do want to think about correctness, right? So, and one of the, but not all errors are equal, right? So the first thing we want to think about is, to what degree do errors affect meaning? And of course, errors that affect meaning are much more important than errors that don't affect meaning. And we might want to look at clause structure, verb tenses, articles and pronouns, and prepositions. And of course, you can make a much longer list, but these are some of the ones that I find. Eric has his hand up. Yes, Eric.
I'm curious to hear what you and others think about the other, or another aspect is not just meaning, but how will they be perceived by native speakers reading? So, article usage, or, the subject verb agreement, which, research has shown is the last thing that the brain can learn, because arguably it's irrelevant, right? We've already in English given the subject, so why do we have to say he goes, right? But when native speakers hear he go, right, it sounds very awkward, right? So, I'm trying to help my students, sound professional and serious, and I, sometimes I think I mark errors like verb tense that maybe don't extremely interfere with meaning, but may look bad, and I want to help them
stand out.
Yeah, so I'm curious what you think about that effort.
Great, let's open it up. Who has an idea? Elena, are you raising your hand?
I'm raising. Thank you. Thank
Please.
you very much. It's okay now. So I think, as a teacher, that this mistake, for example, he goes instead of he go instead of he goes, it doesn't affect meaning, and we mark it as a mistake, but a little mistake, because it doesn't affect meaning, because we understand what the writer or the author means. I think so. And as for me, we mark these as a mistake. And if the mistake affects meaning, we mark it as an error. It is a rough mistake, an error.
Okay. Anyone else? And by the way, I'm thanking AA for joining us. AA, do you have another name?
Do you ask me?
We have, who is AA? Hello, how are you?
Hi, Michael. How are you? How is everyone? Sorry, I joined late. This is Abdullah Shaki.
Okay. Thank you. No problem for joining late. Just wanted to welcome you and find out. Okay, great. Any other comments on, so Elena made an interesting comment. Any other comments on Eric's question?
I think from my perspective, it's important to help the learners and the students to see that those kind of like errors or mistakes, whatever we label them, are developmental stages. So it's okay to make mistakes now. It's okay to make those issues. It's okay. But then asking them, what is your plan to continue growing and become more proficient in writing without making those issues? So I think it's also helping the learners themselves to see, you need to reach a moment where you're writing better, but it's not my plan as a teacher, which I would have, but then making them own their growth, their developmental stages. So I think that sometimes that helps. And in some of those issues is like having a kind of a journaling or a table where they're like looking, oh, what was the issue here? And even like the issue itself rather than like the verb, subject agreement, rather than, oh, he go. Because he go is just an example, but verb subject agreement is the issue itself. And then when they submit their next assignment or next draft, I kind of get that into the rubric. So what mistakes or what issues you made in the past or in the previous draft, you are learning to not do this time. So even including that in the rubric helps them to see the developmental aspect and the growth, but also to help them to own their growth. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, let's go ahead in the interest of time and talk just a bit about vocabulary. Oh, I wanted to actually go back and just one more thing about to sort of chime in on Eric's point. I think for me, error correction is a very personalized grammar correction, right? It's a very personalized process, and I tend to deal very differently with different students. And so if the verb tense is something that's really standing out, and maybe this writer is doing very well in other aspects of writing, but the verb tense is really the thing that's standing out as this constant error, even though, I mean, absolutely, it doesn't affect meaning. But if it's really the thing that's standing out, and I actually have one student right now who's exactly in that position, very good writer, very advanced writer, but just doesn't use verbs well at all, then in that case, I would really focus, and in fact, in her papers, I do focus exactly on that because it's the most outstanding error. But it's true that, it doesn't actually affect meaning, but it's also this kind of glaring error that other people outside of our field would probably be a little bit, they would find it irritating to constantly see this. So that's my input.
And I would just add, if I may,
Please.
The more errors that a reader sees, I think a reader can't help but start to lose a little confidence in the writer as a guide. And, the degree to which that affects their confidence in the writer's ideas, I don't know. I haven't read studies, it's sort of an unfair assumption, right, that one's linguistic abilities should say anything about the quality of their other ideas. But I do know that there are native English speakers who, make the worst assumptions, right, that we all hear about in the news that we abhor. But that is another consideration that I keep in mind, that, I want them to, that was the genesis of my questions, is, was trying to help them seem as professional as possible.
Yeah, and I think that I really think that when we go back to, I mean, to what extent does this question that we're talking about now influence when we go back to content? To what extent does this, the density of errors affect the ability of a reader to read fluently through the writing? Even if those errors aren't, even if a single isolated error itself may not affect the meaning, but if we just start to see too many of them, I think then it takes more concentration on the part of the reader to make sense of the writing, and it detracts from the ability to read fluently. And I sometimes compare writing to playing piano, in the sense that if you occasionally hit one wrong note, it doesn't really bother us, but how many wrong notes can you hit until we just don't recognize the tune anymore, right? Even if each note is only, one key off, eventually, right? Okay, let's go on to vocabulary. So when we're looking at vocabulary in terms of assessing writing, we might want to look at the level of vocabulary. Would we consider it basic, general, advanced, academic, or even specialized? We might look at the precision of word choice. We might look at correct word forms, right? So they're using adjectives in adjective form? Are they using nouns in noun form, verbs in verb form, etc.? Are they using collocations and phrases that imply some kind of fluency and real familiarity with the language? In other words, are they saying things the way that in an English way? Or does it sound like someone who's not a native speaker of English that's sort of trying to use English, but it doesn't come off, although it may be grammatically correct, or it might be it could be a correct vocabulary term. Does it just not have a ring to it in a way that it's not the way an English speaker would express this idea? And of course, that assumes a lot of familiarity. And if you're learning, I mean, Elena students, for example, I'm assuming that a lot of them have never been to an English-speaking country, and they're just learning English as a class in school. And I think that's very difficult to know exactly what English usage is in that case. So it's something that we can't learn from a textbook, and it really, I think it comes from maybe living in an environment where that language is spoken and becoming more familiar with the real usage. Or in the case of writing, we could do it by reading a lot. All right, what we're going to do now, if you can pull out that folder that I sent you, that compressed folder that I sent you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into groups, and I'm going to give you 7 minutes to read the first one, which is called CC1. It's a comparison contrast essay. So let me put you into groups now, and let's just read the instructions here. Please concentrate on one category of assessment only, and then be ready to share your thoughts. So I'm going to give you about 7 minutes to do this. Let me create the groups. So I'm going to create 4 groups. And unfortunately, Eric, you're going to be alone, but we trust you to do that. So group number 1, Jim and Christine are going to discuss content. Group number 2, Khalid and Elena are going to discuss organization. Group number 3, Abdullah and Abdul Samad are going to talk about grammar. And Eric, I'll give you vocabulary. Okay, so take about 7 minutes to read the first article, discuss with your partner, and when we come back, what's going on? I need to set the time, sorry. When we come back, we'll hear from you. So everyone understands what to do?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Errors that you would make a note of.
Well, the second, from my perspective, studying in China is more stressful, but more clearly is not the right form. I don't believe. I don't actually know what he means. Let's see.
Right. So there you go.
Yeah,
right. Is it affecting?
yeah. And then each student is a subject-verb agreement, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't prepared to go all the way through.
No, we're sure. If we go back and look at this, we're seeing, I mean, there's really an error density here that's probably not very acceptable. Eric, yeah, please.
Yeah, where I think it really, I mean, it's hard for us to judge because I think this crowd is so used to figuring out what people mean when their grammar or whatnot is not perfect. And again, it, leads to the question of what will readers, as someone mentioned outside, but like the last sentence of the first paragraph, the sentence structure and word forms are, so problematic that it's really not clear what the student means. Is it conclusion of the paragraph? Is it going to conclude the paper that way? Is the difference causing his disparate education view or caused by?
Right, and even that verb form is mainly cause.
Yeah.
What is that? What does that mean, right?
Mhm.
I somehow understand what he wants to say, because as a non-native speaker of English, I think that we non-native people, when we write, mostly we think in our native language. And the idea that he's trying to say here is that, concluding the paragraph, that's why he is going to tell us why is he suffering as a Chinese studying in America, because of the conflict of the perspective on education which the American people have, and by contrast, what he is living in his own house with a Chinese family. That's the conflict that he is suffering from. And he's trying to say, why is it so disparate? The view, the opinion that he has, his perspective on education is so disparate, that the main cause is that he belongs to a Chinese family living in the USA, and the concept of education is different. He's receiving an influence from home. And that happens also here in Morocco when I teach Moroccan students. I read English words, but Arabic ideas, even the structure of the sentence is sometimes in Arabic we have verb, then comes the subject. And when I write this error, when they make this error, I know exactly why did they make it, because they are thinking in their native language, and there is a strong interference from the thought into their vocabulary and their structures. That's why I didn't have any problem understanding this expression. But I would underline something: the difference the difference between study in China and America. The first mistake, studying or studies. He is trying to compare, but already from the beginning, as a Chinese kid who actually lived in the United States. Well, is he now living in China and speaking about his experience in living in the United States? The first confusion that we face is due to a grammatical mistake.
Okay. Okay. Eric, do you want to go ahead and talk about vocabulary, which was...
Yeah, I think I tried to divide. So there are a number of places where the language is either non-standard or vague, and where it actually interferes with comprehension and where it doesn't. So, for example, and again, I teach academic English at the college level. So as a Chinese kid, you know, we would say that, you know, I would say, you know, that's too informal. More clearly, I understood that, more stressful, but more clear. Follow the same rhythm, that starts to get vague. And then there are 1,000 Hamleys. I had no idea what that meant. Hamlets, I don't, even if there's Hamlet, I don't. And then, as I said, make full use of your talent is a great phrase, but it's vague, and it's, you know, that gets into development. What do they mean? They follow their children's nature in the second paragraph is problematic, because does that mean they follow it, they watch it, or do they, you know, follow it how? Fond of at the end of the, you know, your dream. Again, those don't interfere too much. The grammar problem, which, the wrong form of which, is glaringly wrong, but, you know, we can pretty quickly figure out what is meant. Like the educational thought, I could figure out. Reflected in the differences. That structure is very problematic for me. I think the writer meant reflects the differences, not is reflected in, which would lead to differences in cultural backgrounds, which obviously doesn't make sense. So, and then at the end we have need to select the essence and discard the gross, which of course is not at all the right word, but the context tells us what is meant. So, you know, I think the biggest problem here, vocabulary, biggest problems are maybe some vagueness and, you know, the difficulties you were saying, Michael, of following of the ease or readability or lack thereof of the piece.
Okay. Yeah. So in general, I'm sorry we don't have much time left. I hope we could do more of these, but it doesn't look like we have time. But in general, I think we can all agree that what we're seeing here is a relatively well-developed essay that is really on task. You know, it's got well-developed content. It's very well organized, but there are some severe problems in grammar and vocabulary. So very quickly, Jim, you look like you wanted to say something. Is that?
Oh yeah, you did pick up on that. I also think there's a lot of very strong vocabulary there, which is actually used accurately.
Okay.
American curriculum is quite flexible, focusing on life experience, guiding diversified development, and emphasizing students' practical ability and thinking ability. That's pretty good. And I thought some really good vocabulary. And actually just to me a bit impressive and well used, so that vocabulary and grammatically that's not perfect, but it's a good, and there's several sentences that way. I felt we read the second one of ours and I'm like, the content was there, but it was sort of like, oh my God, the organization, vocabulary, all this stuff was really problematic. So this one in comparison, which I know is not a good thing to do when you're doing ratings, but I feel like it was actually got a lot of strength to it, had a lot of strength.
Okay. Great. So quickly, let's just go around the room, and I'd like everyone to give it, just assign it, you know, considering all of these categories, I'd like you to assign it a grade from A, B, C, D, or F. And of course, you know, this is not official and we're not using a rubric, but just a sort of impression based on the discussion that we've had. Eric, we'll begin with you.
I have to demur because I don't know what the grade level is, what the context is, who it's meant for, what draft it is.
Anyway, I mean, if we can imagine that, well, let's say it's a first draft, and if you can imagine through the prompt that we're probably writing for sort of an upper intermediate level. Well, Eric, we'll come back to you then, and let's start with if you'd like to do this, or if you wouldn't like to do this, if you think this is unfair, that's okay too.
I think for a first draft, I would. I mean, it depends on what we've covered, you know, as far as grammar. If we've covered these things, again, yeah, I'm gonna balk.
Okay, Abdul Samad, what would you say? Just a ballpark.
Yeah, so I think I would agree also with Eric. I would need to know more about the context, the rubric, what I'm doing, who are the students, their first language, their growth, if I have teaching them before or not, and many more. But if I can just solely on this piece of writing, I think I would give it either a B- or a C+. Like.
Okay, and of course, this is a very unfair question, really, because again, I think those are all valid points that we don't know the context of the class, we don't know the level, and we don't know anything about the student, and we're not really using a rubric, which is of course what we should be doing. But anyone else want to just sort of venture a guess, or maybe it's an unfair. Abdullah, where are you zooming in from today?
I'm from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So I would give it B-, really. And I think if I can just say something in 30 seconds, Michael, I mean, in the CFR levels between A0 or A1 to B1, we really have, as teachers, we really have to be mean and harsh officers. Because, you know, I read this article by, you know, David Bartholomew, Inventing the University, and, you know, how to join the academic, you know, discourse. You are expected to do really well. And, you know, those teachers, I mean, when exiting English language program, they don't really understand the difference between fluency and accuracy, and they expect everything to be really perfect. And so many of them won't really tolerate mistakes like that.
Okay, great. Well, we're about out of time. Thanks everyone so much for coming, for participating. I tried to make this as participatory as I possibly could. I hope it was a good experience for everyone. I wish we could have gotten around to more essays. I want to thank our sponsor again, Speaking Proficiency Assessment, or SPA. So again, thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks especially for participating. And I hope to see you next month for our our IELT webinar on validity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks,
Yes.
Michael.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.